The key words which summarize the themes for today's readings are rejection, commitment, perseverance, and continuing to keep on keeping on. The Gospel of Luke begins by telling us today that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem when the hour for his departure from this world drew near. Jerusalem is the place where Jesus will suffer and die. Jerusalem is the place where Jesus will accomplish the Father's will. Jerusalem is the place where Jesus will go no matter what the consequences, no matter what the outcome. And even as he sets out to Jerusalem, he is rejected by a town of Samaritans. James and John want to respond to this rejection with violence. Jesus will have none of it. He is not a violent man. He does not condone violence. He will not use violence to bring about the kingdom, even though he is strong, even though he is powerful, even though he has the might. He will not use it to call down fire on the Samaritan town like James and John want to do. Jesus never coerced any of his disciples. He did not put any pressure or force on them, but he made it abundantly clear in the text that follow that following him would not be easy, and that following him would mean a total and unconditional commitment. In the three would-be disciples that we hear about today, the first is told very explicitly that while the foxes may have their holes and the birds of the air may have their nests, the Son of Man, Jesus, will have nowhere to lay his head. In other words, the disciples are called to a life of insecurity. The disciples are called to a life of physical discomfort. The disciples are called to a life of lack of possessions. Will they dare to answer the Lord? Another wants to go home and say goodbye to his parents. But Jesus is very explicit again when he says that once you have decided to follow, there is no turning back. Once the face has been set towards Jerusalem, it is set as flint, and one has to persevere in the following. Even to the one who wants to fulfill family commitments like burying the dead, which was a very sacred and religious obligation, Jesus says no. And the reason why he says no is because the kingdom is more powerful, the kingdom is more important, the kingdom is the all-important focus of a disciple. In the first reading, we will hear how Elisha becomes a disciple of Elijah and is able to go back to say goodbye to his parents. As far as Jesus is concerned, the goodbyes must be said before the following, because once one follows, one has to persevere in the following. And this is what Paul tells the Galatians in the second reading of today, when he invites them to live lives in the Spirit and not lives in the flesh. To live lives which are giving and sharing and concerned about others, rather than lives which are concerned only about the selves and about the externals and about the flesh. If one is a true disciple of Jesus, then like Jesus, one will not be afraid to set one's own face like flint towards Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is the place where God's will is done. God's will is the only thing that matters for the disciple, and whether family, whether material possessions, whether different kind of experiences come in the way, they will not deter the disciple from going toward Jerusalem like they did not deter Jesus. Let us pray then that each one of us who professes to follow Jesus in our own state and way of life might be faithful to our call and follow him perseveringly and without any kind of inhibitions and halting.